Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Tracy, do you think that the reason it's so hard to buy a house is because of BlackRock is buying all the houses?
There's a loaded question. That's like, what's that famous loaded question? Maybe this is more well known in Britain, but the when did you start beating your wife question?
No, we have that here.
Okay.
Here. It's a little different.
Yeah, a little different.
It's also when did you stop, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yes, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. This conversation has already gone off the rails.
I did a deadlift. 1, 2, 3.
Hegemony.
Okay, good. Okay.
What two?
Hegemony. Barges.
This is an after-school special, except
I've decided I'm going to base my entire personality going forward on campaigning for a strategic pork reserve in the U.S.
Where's the best squid ink pasta?
These are the important questions. Is it robots taking over the world?
No, I think that, in a couple of years, the AI will do a really good job of making the Odd Lots podcast. And people will say, I don't really need to listen to Joe and Tracy anymore.
We do have
Cha-ching.
The perfect guest.
You're listening to Lots More, where we catch up with friends about what's going on right now.
Because even when the Odd Lots is over, there's always lots more.
And we really do have the perfect guest. Didn't we learn that big factoid, that really interesting factoid in one of our conversations that actually the single family institutional ownership includes individual landlords in addition to huge firms like BlackRock?
I just feel like this is what I think about all the time. TikTok macro, which is BlackRock is controlling all of the market. No, sorry. BlackRock is controlling all the market. Blackstone is why you can't buy a house. All people in Congress are insider traders. What else is there? What else is there, Kyla?
In terms of TikTok and what people talk about on there?
Yeah, what are the sort of pillars of modern beliefs about how the public that needs to be educated?
Yeah, it's always the system is working against you, right? I think there's so many misbeliefs about the economy, which just it makes it really hard to talk about the economy. Inflation going down doesn't mean that prices are going down. Right. I think that's a really big one. And then the BlackRock thing really takes hold. That's very, very
popular.
That's
a big pillar of how many people see the problems with the economy these days.
Yeah, ETFs own the world.
ETFs, own the world.
Okay.
I'm trying to think what else.
There's a lot. I should say we are speaking with Kyla Scanlon, our good friend, who has just published a new book called, fittingly, I have to say, I love this title, In This Economy, How Money and Markets Really Work. She's also a Bloomberg opinion contributor. She's been on the podcast before. And congrats on the book, Kyla.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's super exciting.
Thank you for coming to chat with us.
Oh, no, thank you all for having me.
Also the creator of the word vibe session.
Yeah.
Which is just become... It is you, right? You said it first, right?
Yeah, no.
And now everyone says it, and I was people at JP Morgan.
I know, I saw that.
Are claiming this is a vibe session, but you created it.
Yeah, no, I did back in July 2022. But yeah, no, other people have taken credit for it, which is fine,
No, it's not fine.
No, it's not.
It's just how it works.
But this is sort of the amazing thing about the vibe session, because when you first wrote about it, it was because the hard data was still coming in relatively strong, but all the survey data, people seemed really, really downbeat on the economy. And now, a couple years later, that's still the case, more or less.
Yeah, people are still feeling really bad. I think about the Harris Guardian poll, which was 55% of people think that, or 56% of people think that we're in a recession. 49% of people think the stock market is down. 49% of people think unemployment's at a record high. And it's man, there's an element of the vibe session that is structural affordability issues, right? Like a housing crisis, elder care, child care. But then there is an element of the vibe session, which is media, right? And TikTok, as we were talking about with the BlackRock ETF and how it's buying up single family homes, apparently. But yeah, it's complicated.
Where do you think this comes from? So this sort of, I don't know, people talk about trust and this sort of, people just not believing things that are objective facts, this sort of deep skepticism or antipathy maybe towards large institutions or conspiratorial beliefs. Where do you think, is it a social media thing? What do you think it's all about?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's information overload. We just have way too much going on all of the time. And I don't think we're kind of built to process all of that. And then just the framing of things really can be impactful. If a media headline is negative, that increases the click-through rate by 2.3%. If it's positive, it decreases it by 1.9%. So the incentives are very clear there. But I also think, if you're not freaking out, it means that you don't care.
Yeah,
and so
right.
I think the overall idea is that you have to be like anxious and worried. And there are things to be anxious and worried about, but I think it's exacerbated by the way that we engage with one another online.
What sort of engagement do you see on a platform like TikTok? Because I feel like I'm not on TikTok, but I am on Twitter/X. And one rule of social media seems to be if you say something negative about the economy, it's almost guaranteed to get more retweets and engagement than something that's positive or nuanced or educational. Is that something that you experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing is doomerism can absolutely take over. Doomers sound really smart. Like if you're like, the world's ending, everyone's like, that guy knows what he's saying. and I think that is just a great way to sell a newsletter. And so you see a lot of people selling newsletters by selling a narrative. And I think it's the same on TikTok. Like all the algorithmic incentives are for you to post very negatively. And it's hard as a creator because you know that. But there's one of my favorite sayings right now is nuance doesn't sell. And I think that's a big part of what we see on social media is people feel like they have to take a clear side on what they're talking about.
By the way, I see your book In This Economy, #1 bestseller in the business encyclopedias category of Amazon. The #2 is the audiobook version. And then 3 and 4 are both Robert's Rules of Orders. And then 5 is the Kindle edition.
Oh.
So congratulations on your absolute dominance of the business encyclopedias category on Amazon.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny what they end up categorizing you on Amazon. It's also doing well in the money and monetary policy section, which is fun. Yeah, but I didn't know it was a business encyclopedia, so it's good to know that it is.
That's very cool. What was one of the things that you sort of learned through writing the book? So I was flipping through it. And first of all, I love the little cartoons and the drawings and the diagrams. They're very, very sweet and also very illustrative of some of the points that you're trying to make. But I'm curious, is there one thing that sort of stood out to you when you were researching the book?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that for me, like there was 2 things, right? Like how do you structure a book and then what should a book be about? And
this is important for me and Tracy, by the way, because every once in a while we talk about writing a book together and we're not very close. So we're going to listen very intently here to learn how it's done. Right.
Well, this is how I did it. I don't know if it's how it's done. But I learned, you have to have a flow to a book and the structure of it really matters. Even though each chapter can be read separately, you kind of have to tell a narrative throughout it. And that's a little bit difficult with something as big as the economy.
Right, because your book is quite wide-ranging.
Yeah.
It's basically everything that you find interesting about markets and the economy.
Yeah, no, and I rewrote it 3 times. So the structure of the book was a big one. And then I think too, I spent a lot of time trying to understand the history of the economy because I felt like that was really important to include in some of the beginning chapters, like how did we get here? And so the beginning of the book is kind of like the tapestry of the economy, the economic kingdom. So the Federal Reserve Castle, the monetary policy castle, the fiscal policy, inflation.
I like the inflation pizza, by the way.
Thank you. And all the diagrams are meant to sort of guide people throughout the book. And I guess the biggest lesson learned for writing an econ book, and it was an interesting lesson to learn, is the structure really matters and how you guide people through something as hairy and confusing and big as the economy is important.
You say people don't click on nuance, they don't click on, and yet you're into nuance yourself. And so as someone who has been a successful financial system educator and now a successful author, it's apparently possible. It's apparently possible to be successful and nuanced at the same time.
Yeah. I think it totally is. I just think it's much easier to be doomeristic.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I think it's super important to have nuance because that's what the economy is all about. Everything has an opposite and equal reaction, and it's the same in the economy. But I think it's just easier to tell lies.
Yeah, Tracy, my last job, about 10 years ago at Business Insider, I sort of wrote, my last post there was about why I really like covering markets. I sort of thought about the blind man touching the elephant, except the elephant keeps moving. So not only do you never really get the full picture, at any given time, by the time you think you're getting the full picture, it's there's another data point. The elephant is already evolved into a new species. It's not easy.
But you know what I think? Well, I'm not an authority on this subject by any means, but you know what I think the solution is to nuance is comedy and entertainment in some respects. And that's kind of what you've been doing on TikTok, right? Like you make informational videos, but they're fun and engaging to watch. And so you can still provide nuance, but you still command the attention of the audience because they want to watch them.
Yeah. That's the goal with like making, and that's why the book has illustrations too. It's like, if you make things fun, people are more likely to pay attention. It's like a game of human behavior, right? And so, if you can like tell jokes about things that are inherently kind of funny, like a lot of stuff in the economy, even though some parts of it are very serious, like unemployment and inflation, like some parts of it you can have fun with. And I try to do that as much as I can, because I think that's how you engage people who think they're outside of the economy within economics education.
You know what I don't know? How did you realize what your career was?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
That's a good question.
It's like, people tweet and people post, and then suddenly it's like, oh, like people listen, and this is what I do now. Like it was not until a couple years of being a journalist that I realized, like, oh, I guess this is what I'm going to be. I'm a journalist. Like, at what point did you realize that this is what you do?
It was really around GameStop is kind of when the videos started. And then I spent probably 6 months being like, I don't know what's happening. And I was just making these videos and I didn't know if anything would work. And then I kept on writing my newsletter. And then in July 2022, the Vibe session kind of took off. And I think that was kind of when I was like, oh, okay, I'm saying things and people are listening. And I had the New York Times opinion piece, which was really awesome. And that's kind of when I was like, oh, okay. Wow, whoops, so.
Why do you think Vibe session took off as a term?
I think people were just really, or this has been feedback that other people have given me. I think people were just looking for something to explain this discrepancy between consumer sentiment and economic data. Like so many of my conversations are about why do people feel the way that they do? And I think the Vibe session word was at least a step in the direction of addressing, why there is such a big gap and why people were a little bit worried about why that gap existed.
Neither Tracy and I are on TikTok. Are we like at risk of just becoming completely irrelevant? Like I don't even use Reels. All I do is like do the podcast and post tweets and stuff. How separated am I from actually the real world of where people are actually getting their information?
I don't know if TikTok is the real world, but I think TikTok is at risk of being banned in the United States. But
I'm biased. But that was like, okay, well,
Joe's like, that's fine with me.
Yeah, that's fine with me. It's like level the playing field for me because I'm so far behind. No, but I have no opinion on this. I'm a journalist, but go on.
No, a lot of young people do get their news from social media. And that's why I made my videos on social media. It was because I was like, this is where people are. They need information about the economy where they are. And so that's what I set out to do. But yeah, it's definitely where people, it's like the watering hole of the internet in a big way, but not like Twitter. Twitter's a little bit different. It's very direct on Twitter.
You know who I blame for TikTok being a massive hole in our consciousness, Joe? No. Ironically, I kind of blame Sam Rowe because he amalgamates the best of TikTok and then posts it on Instagram, which means I never have to go on TikTok because he just does all the aggregation.
Shout out to Sam Rowe.
Yeah, it's a public service for sure. Kyla, I want to talk more about the Vibe session and where we are in the economy now. But so inflation has been coming down a little bit. And yet the sentiment surveys are still coming in pretty, I'm generalizing here.
No, they're dismal.
Yeah, they're bad. If this is a structural problem with some of the surveys, if people are too polarized because of the media, or if people are reflecting on the longer term outlook and just thinking, I'm never going to be able to buy a house or I'm never going to be able to retire. And that's feeding into some of the shorter term responses. Is this discrepancy ever going to go away, or is this something that we and economists are going to have to learn to accept and kind of analyze and digest?
Yeah, that's something I've been wrestling with quite a bit ever since the Harris Guardian. And you got to take all surveys with a grain of salt. But ever since the Harris Guardian survey came out, where it was about more than just vibes, it was a clear disconnect from reality.
Yeah.
Right? It was we're not believing in truth, which is the stock market's up, unemployment's down.
Right.
We're not in a recession. I do think that because of information being a playing field for foreign adversaries, that there is more and more of an incentive to push consumer sentiment down. People are getting their information from all sorts of disparate sources. And so there really isn't a cohesive way to consume information like how, we used to when it was just like one cable TV show. So I do think that sentiment will be impacted just because of the way that we get our information now is so confusing. But I am very optimistic that it'll improve, but I'm not sure yet how it will. I think it has something to do with transparency and trust and rebuilding that, but that is a big project to undertake.
That seems like a really big project. Why can't everyone just do what I do, which is just fire up the Bloomberg terminal, type out top, and look at the most credible selection of news stories related to business in the world? It's easy. I never get any misinformation.
I know.
Kyla, don't respond.
Just get
don't
a
respond.
Just get a Bloomberg.
I've learned the best thing to do is just don't respond to Joe when he says things
and then
like
you
this.
just have your information fire hose solved.
There's this crazy statistic about, and it sort of refutes what I was just saying about media being a way that people get confused. Is like the average American spends like 5 minutes a month on the top 25 news sites. So people are really just scrolling headlines. And so I think it's like all of these things. Mm-hmm. And also I think the decline of local papers, everything has become very big and national and algorithmically designed, which sounds very doomer of me, but I think we're in a weird spot. And there's so much uncertainty going into the election too. I think it's just going to be a funky few months.
What's your creative process like for creating the TikTok videos? And I have to say, at this point, sometimes when I'm imagining like the FOMC meeting around like a big table in a boardroom, I sometimes have visions of like you talking to yourself the way you do from like different camera angles, and Jerome Powell going, "I think we should do this," and then Kyla responds like, "No, we should do this." And anyway, that's just me.
That's so funny. Yeah, the creative process is kind of like whatever I'm into that day on it. I get a lot of inspiration from other videos, all sorts of like movie makers and video creators, and that is how the creative process is driven. What I try to do is a multidisciplinary approach. So in the book, I have a lot of poems and philosophy and literature, and I feel like that's really fun because I feel like with economics, we kind of stay in one line most of the time, which is like money, but you can have a lot of fun just talking about how all this stuff relates to everything else.
Totally. I mean, I think this is one of the things we've learned on Odd Lots. There are very few topics that can't fit in some way. Like in some way, you just sort of realize in some way it's all business and economics. One of the questions that people ask me, like, well, what should I read? Or what do you like to consume? What's what other books that you like, a media diet, or like if someone said like, I want to learn more about the economy, or I want to learn more about markets, what should I read? What do you tell people?
Well, I have a great book out you can read in this economy. But I love reading books that aren't about the economy, but like kind of an economics angle. So I'm reading this book called Paved Paradise right now, which is very good. It's about parking lots and like the history of parking lots. And that's been really fun. I feel like that's right up your guys' alley.
I love single topic history books are so good.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And then I just finished Cultish, which is about like cults and how they started up. And then I'm reading The Material World by Ed Conway, and that's been really fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one. But yeah, I basically read everything. I read a lot of philosophy during the pandemic, which I think a lot of people did. And now I'm kind of on this like real world kick where I really am obsessed with like geology and materials and stuff like that, and how that can be applied to the economy.
So you mentioned, things sort of taking off for you during GameStop. And I think the last time we had you on was to talk about meme stocks. And maybe we did a little bit of crypto then as well. But of course, in recent weeks, we have seen the return of some meme stocks, although it seems to have kind of gone away
but GameStop was
relatively quickly.
We're recording this May 29th. It was up like 25% yesterday.
Yeah, it was a lot, but like not quite on the scale of the first round of meme mania, and it's dropped again. But what do you think is happening there? Why does it seem to resonate, even 2 years later?
Yeah, I mean, I think Roaring Kitty returning probably had something to do with it. But, one topic I've thought a lot about is financial nihilism. So people sort of not believing in markets. But I also think like GameStop is sort of fun. Like, it is a casino in the way that if you throw some money at it, you could make a lot of money. And so I think people view it that way. But then I do think there's an element of financial nihilism, which I know that you all just covered sports gambling. I think that is maybe sort of in the same bucket. Connor Sin, also from Bloomberg Opinion, has a great theory where he's like, because millennials and young people can't buy a home, they sort of have this extra cash that they're going to throw at things like GameStop and sports gambling. And I think that all of those things are simultaneously sort of true.
Eventually, somehow, even the most online Gen Zers, like eventually they'll get old like we are, and eventually some of them will own homes, and eventually some of them will have kids. Do you think that for younger generations, they're just going to permanently see the world differently than many other people? Or do you think it's going to be like, no, the constraints that inevitably happen as people get older and having to save and pay for childcare and pay for elder care will be a sort of forcing mechanism for having, I guess, views or media diet that we sort of see as a little bit more normie?
Yeah, I mean, I think the mean reversion, I suppose, is normie, as you might say. Yeah, I think that like as you get older, you just have more responsibilities, so you're more likely to become more normie, to say it again. But people aren't having kids like they used to. Like everybody knows, and it's really tough to get a home. So I think that will be something that we see. I just think that's something that happens over time. But it'll be interesting to see how the Gen Zers move throughout the world. I wrote this piece for Fast Company this time last year or a little bit earlier about how Gen Z thinks about work, which is very, very different. Like all the media terms, they're just like quiet quitting and all that stuff. All right. They just had something where it was like a quiet lunch or something where people were like going to lunch and they were like, why would you do that when you could work for a corporation and not take lunch and just work all day? So I think that there is more of a desire for work-life balance, and corporations don't provide perhaps the same support that they used to, like when there was pensions and more supportive healthcare possibly. So I think it's just a totally different relationship with work, and I don't know if that'll carry through to the future though.
Again, Tracy and I maybe one day we'll write a book ourselves. So we're curious about this whole process and what happened. What's next for you now? So the book just came out May 28th. What happens now?
What would your book be about?
I don't know. That's the problem. We don't. Yeah. We can never think of an idea. You stole our idea.
Oh, did I?
No, how money and Mark? No, not really. But that's the problem. I have no idea what it would be about.
Yeah, I mean, you could just do a compilation of all the Odd Lots episodes.
Yeah, we could. We were thinking about something like,
Wait. Can we not have this on the thing? Because we might actually do it.
All right. So we've thought about ideas like that. But what's next? What happens after you write a book?
Yeah, I don't know yet. It was like a really big project for about a year. And like right now, I'm just very interested. This is like personal, I suppose, but I'm very interested in learning. Everything that I've done has been in my bedroom. It's been like, low resource. It just sort of hacked from zero. And now I have, everybody's been so supportive and kind, but I'm really curious to explore like other mediums like radio, TV, see what that's like.
Maybe
I could see like In This Economy Netflix style documentary, right? That'd be fun.
Yeah, I'm really interested in exploring how the government works. I feel like one theory that I had, and I didn't really explore it throughout the book, is, if you don't understand the system that you're in, it's tough to make good decisions about the system, but you're also more likely to not trust the system if you don't understand the complexities. And so I think a really useful thing would be to explore the complexities of the system. What is the U.S. Post Office? You all do such a good job with this, with the podcast, but I think like really going deep into the more government-facing stuff.
I think that's a great idea. Like, what do all these agencies actually do and how they operate? Total black box.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that leads to the distrust and the dismay and all the stuff we've been talking about throughout the podcast. But I would really like to explore that. Like, I'm just very fascinated by different mediums to educate about the economy. And like, it's this thing that people think they're not a part of. But like, I got a coffee about an hour ago, and that was like an economic transaction. I took the subway here. That's an economic transaction. We're sitting in chairs, which are made of material and probably like put together by hand or a machine. And all of this is like part of the economy. And I think that the more that people can sort of resonate with that and see themselves as part of the economy, the better off we could be. And so that's my soapbox on it, but I think it's important.
So I remember actually going back to GameStop, and maybe this, gets into the nuance thing. I remember we did a handful of, there was a lot of financial nihilism. You mentioned the term financial nihilism, and, people just doing their YOLO bets and their YOLO losses.
It's the lottery ticket philosophy,
but
right?
There were a few people who actually used that moment to learn more. And we did a few episodes on how, what is gamma squeezes and stuff. Yeah. And probably most people didn't care, but there were a handful that's I really want to learn more. And then actually use that moment, I want to understand about how, the Greek letters work and options math and stuff like that. What have you found? Is there a cohort of people that you've been able to connect with online who through your stuff, have really gone deep into these topics?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I get really special messages from people being I majored in economics because of you.
Oh, that's the best feeling.
Yeah, nice. It's so kind. Or I passed an econ test because of your video on Veblen goods.
Oh, that's great.
And so I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but there's been a lot of really kind notes about how people have realized the economics world can be fun, that they're a part of it, that you can understand it. It doesn't have to be a bunch of charts on the screen, right? And so, yeah. And I think also GameStop kind of opened up to people's minds to investing. Before, when I would talk to my friends about investing, they would be that's not something I'm ever interested in. But now with GameStop, they're oh, okay, I could make $1 million. But they're just more likely to be receptive to the knowledge because GameStop streamlined so many conversations about the stock market.
Well, this is the other thing about your content and your approach to economics, especially, is I feel like you take into account human behavior in a way that traditional economics, with the exception of behavioralist economics, obviously doesn't necessarily do. So in a classical interpretation of the economy or even the market, stuff like GameStop isn't really supposed to happen. And people are always supposed to act rationally and things should eventually balance out. And yet we've seen time and time again that the economy is, the result of individual human decisions, and sometimes it doesn't work precisely as expected.
Yeah, humans are irrational, which kind of goes against, what we think they should be, which is rational. But I think that's what I tried to do with the book, because there's so many brilliant economists out there. This book is a consolidation. It's not Kyla's big original ideas. It's all these other ideas from all these other amazing economists, Basic Economics by Sowell, Economics in One Lesson by Hazlitt. All of those books are so good, but they're so dense, and sometimes they don't attach back to the real world. And so what I really wanted to do with this book was get into theory and why stuff happens, but then also be oh, look, this is how inflation impacts you, and this is how the labor market impacts you, and this is how GDP impacts you. And here are real world examples of all of those things. And yeah, instead of being here's a supply and demand graph, and that's all you get to know about.
I just want to say, Economics in One Lesson is the biggest lie there is. That's a 218-page book. Someone handed me that to me when I was in college, Henry Hazlitt's book. I don't understand how they got away with titling it that.
It's clearly dishonest marketing.
One Lesson is a 220-page book. You mentioned charts. Do people still Twitch stream? And could we have a show, Tracy and I, where we look at charts on the Bloomberg terminal live on Twitch and talk about that? Would that be a hit?
You're really innovating on show format right now.
Well, I'm talking to you, you would have a good answer
on Twitch. Question. Yeah, I mean, I think people just like to watch people talk about stuff.
Okay.
That's my big theory. I think people love watching podcasts because it kind of feels like you're just hanging out. So I think you all could definitely get on Twitch and stream some charts and show people the Bloomberg terminal that's
we got to do competitive charting.
Yeah,
or
you should. Competitive Excel.
Someone could say housing, and then we race to see who has the most interesting housing chart.
That'd be sick.
That'd be fun.
I like
That'd
this.
Be fun.
Oh my gosh. Lots More is produced by Carmen Rodriguez and Dashiell Bennett with help from Moses Ondom and Cale Brooks.
Our sound engineer is Blake Maples. Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts.
Please rate, review, and subscribe to Odd Lots and Lots More on your favorite podcast platforms.
And remember that Bloomberg subscribers can listen to all of our podcasts ad-free by connecting through Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.